All right. Well, even without a quorum, we will still call to order our meeting today for the November Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. This meeting, over the course of 2020 has had a number of different kind of defining events as we've moved forward. And one of the themes throughout this has been kind of finding that balance between public health and public safety. And recently we had the passing of ballot measure 110, which has raised a lot of questions about where that balance is between public health and public safety. And for many of us on this call or on this in this meeting and that serve here, it'll be one of our central challenges over the next year as we look at a different approach and find ways to make sure that we still engage people and provide services for those who are most vulnerable and hurting as they struggle through substance use disorder. So we will find time to discuss that here in one of our future meetings. Today, our theme is going to be around outreach and supports, both from mental health crisis work that gets done in the community, as well as Medford Police Department's livability work, speaking to people who are unhoused, unsheltered, and who often are reluctant to engage in some of the resources and some of the different approaches that we've been able to take around that. Today, our guests are Chief Clausen from the LIVABILITY team and Rick Rollins from Jackson County Mental Health Crisis to talk about some of their approaches. I apologize in advance as I have to jump off for a noon meeting. I'm getting pulled into some FEMA projects, which are exciting and daunting because I don't know too much about them yet, but as I move over to those, I will come back and watch this meeting as it is recorded. And I'm really interested in it because this is one of those things where we hear a lot about it in the media. We know that our citizens have a lot of concerns about it. And I think that there are some really innovative and humanistic approaches towards the work that's getting done there that's reflective of both input we've heard, but also what we know to really work with populations that are often difficult to serve. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Clausen. And after that, I think Jasmine will make sure that we have the right folks speaking. But Chief, take it away. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I am going to talk about the livability team, and the livability team is pretty exclusive to MPD, but the point that I want to make, and as Eric already mentioned, it's really about partnerships, and it's about community outreach, and I'm going to show, I've got several slides that kind of highlight that fact. So I think most of you have probably been through this presentation before, but there are a couple new folks, so I'm just going to do a little review. So this team now has been in existence for a year and a half. It was a 2-year budget process that we were able to obtain by increasing the utility bill $1.06. It's a $1.2 million funding opportunity and that's for 2 years. So it basically runs us about $600,000 a year. And that allowed us to hire 3 new police officers, 1 code enforcement officer, and 1 record specialist. And our strategy is certainly to keep doing what we're doing and protect our parks and the greenway and the public, our businesses, our parking garages by enforcing the law. But secondarily, and most importantly, we wanted this team to break away from some of the traditional law enforcement roles and work to build rapport with the homeless to link them to resources. And we felt like this was really important because no one else was really going down onto the greenway and doing this. There's a lot of community partners that are involved in homelessness, but there were not necessarily everybody was going down onto the greenway. And so we wanted to create kind of a pathway and those partnerships so they could do so safely. And then the last thing is strengthening our partnerships with our stakeholders. As I mentioned, we know there's a lot of people involved in this, and we really wanted to work to build that network. I'll talk about how we did that and how we're doing that. First off, it was really important to us to find the right people, and I feel like we truly hit the jackpot with some of the folks that we selected. I wanted folks that weren't merely about numbers, but could also focus on making connections and building rapport, and it had more of that compassion mindset. So nothing is beneath these folks. They will take trash bags out to the Greenway. They'll take folks to medical appointments. We arrange bus tickets for family members if a family member is willing to take somebody in, doesn't matter where they're at in the country. They'll work on getting ID for employment. We've worked through housing paperwork to sometimes it's just a matter of checking a few boxes. And then in one of the pictures there, you can see that we paid for some new pads for one of the medical, or for one of the wheelchairs for this individual. So really nothing is beneath them. Whatever the need is, they'll either take care of it or they'll contact our local service providers and make it happen. We're also coordinating with our courts to make sure that people can navigate the criminal justice system. We've had a couple cases where we've been able to get a couple single men into addiction services where there was beds available, but they had warrants and charges, fines that were in the 20,000 range that we had to work through first. And so those were through our own muni court. We were able to work through those and help resolve that. Long term, though, I know the sheriff and I and Tina have been in, and actually Beth Heckert have been involved in ongoing discussions about doing a community court to kind of lower some additional barriers that people or that homeless face when they go to court. So I see that model taking place here in the Rogue Valley soon. So here's just kind of a snapshot of what both the sheriff and I are dealing with. We, right out of the hole back in September 2019, we wanted to take a look at what our actual problem was. And so we used a mapping program to do a GIS map pinpoint location of each camp. And so the green is the active camps and the red is camps that have been abandoned. So it's just garbage that's been left behind. And we unfortunately have seen an increase. So, and an increase despite the fact that we have the Kelly shelter running in full arrangement right now. Plus we have the urban campground, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is 52 tents, and yet the problem has increased. And so I really feel, and I think the sheriff would probably agree with me, that COVID has really dealt us a tough one. We can't use the traditional criminal justice means to get folks in, through the jail, out to transitional housing, our normal methods that we would use to help deal with the Greenway. So, and then also we're continuing to see an influx of folks from other states. So I think, the more appealing we make it, the word gets out, and then they want to come here and take advantage of our services. I do think that is a legitimate issue. So, and then of course this, as Eric mentioned, we'll have conversation about Measure 110. I hope, my fingers are crossed, that the problem doesn't blow up, but I think our homeless problem could get worse with that measure. So, but anyway, this is a snapshot of what we're dealing with, and the 197 encampments is as of 2 weeks ago. So it's very real and fresh numbers. We do have a homeless system action plan. This was a third-party consultant that came in and did kind of a visioning process to help us kind of consolidate our homeless program and to see where we had overlapping issues. And one of their action plans or recommendations was that we create a response group to support the homeless in this area. And so that's action 3.1, and we've done that through these partnerships. Our Chronically Homeless Outreach Partnership is a monthly meeting where we invite all the listed folks, and actually there's many more now, to come together. We take 10 individuals that we focus on for that week or for that month. And it's a great opportunity because, as we know, homelessness is a very complex issue. There's many factors that go into an individual's situation. And so it really does take a community, and it takes partnerships to be able to help resolve some of those issues. As far as boots on the ground, this is really kind of some of our key outreach folks that go with us. They'll actually hop in the ATVs with us and go down onto the Greenway and make contact with folks. There's a few folks that we don't see it often, but there are a few folks that are hostile toward law enforcement, and we can stand by. We can let Bailey Putnam or Jerry LaFord do their thing, and they do it so well. And oftentimes they know those clients, so they can make those connections. So sometimes we do just kind of take a back seat, and we're there for safety. But many times we have built rapport. The folks know us. They're very comfortable with us in uniform. So I just want to make that clear as well. The second goal that I'm going to talk about, there was many goals, but the other one was to create some kind of shelter or camp to address the camps that we're seeing along the Greenway and in our parks. And it just so happened that the sheriff and I had been having conversations about trying to get folks off of the Greenway before the fire season really kicked in. And so we were able to meet this need by creating the urban campground. And the urban campground is a campground that we were able to put out on private property. It was a partnership with the city and the sheriff's department and Rogue Retreat. We were able to utilize a piece of private property. It's the old Crater meat packing plant. And so far, it's been pretty successful in getting folks kind of transitioning out of the Greenway and into the next level. We really did this. Both the sheriff and I felt very strongly about the fact that we had extreme fire danger this year, and this is just a 4-month snapshot of how many fires we'd had in that same location. That was right up to June 29th, so that was well before our Alameda fire. And obviously, we know what happens when there's campfires and reckless behavior down there. So that was our number one priority, and to try to get folks off the Greenway. But our second priority was just the extreme environmental damage that these folks do. And I put a couple pictures in here just because I think it's key to point out. And one of the biggest criticisms that our social justice, I'll call them the social justice warriors, the people who are really down on the police contacting the homeless right now, they accuse us of taking tents. And what I like to point out is that we give everyone an opportunity. We have to post 24 hours in advance. Oftentimes we do 48 hours. We give them an opportunity to take their belongings. But I put pictures in here because I think it's important to point out that this is not life-sustaining stuff. Oftentimes it's garbage, it's stolen property. We know that if a bike goes missing somewhere in the city of Medford from someone's porch, the first place we're going to look is probably down on the Greenway. The second place is a pawn shop. So for some reason, all kinds of stolen property ends up down on the Greenway. So I point that out too. It's not just us going through and cleaning up tents and taking their bedding and their precious resources. It's no one else is cleaning up the garbage. So that was after one sweep this spring, and then this was one of our most recent cleanup operations. So, and this is occurring. These photos are inside the city, but this is the same kind of stuff out in the county. So just back to the campground real quick. So right now the campground is an area. It's an area where we can bring all of our supportive resources together. La Clinica goes out there, Jackson County Public Health, for medical screening and syringe exchange. We have mental health, legal services goes out there. So for those 52 folks that are able to go out and stay out there, there's a lot of wraparound services for those folks. And then ideally what we want is for those folks to make that transition from the Greenway tent camping to this tent situation. And then what we're really trying to promote is for those folks to then transition into the Kelly shelter. And there is some reluctance. Some folks who are really liking tent camping, they prefer it. They don't want to go to the Kelly shelter. That's not really Rogue Retreat's model. They want folks to better themselves and to work on getting to the next level. So we're having to put some restrictions in place. Right now we're talking about a 60-day restriction just to keep people kind of moving and progressing. So and ideally then folks would move from the Kelly shelter, which is the communal shelter, to the Hope Village, where they could again get their own house. Case managers could continue to work with them, and they advance. So one thing that we noticed, one success story that came out of this, just within the first week, there was one gentleman that was so concerned about his belongings getting stolen that he ended up just remaining with his campsite all day. And when we told him about the urban campground, he picked up his belongings, took it all down there, and he knew that they were going to be safe and secure. And so he was able to go out that day and get a job. And 24 hours later, he had a job and was working. And so that's what we want. He actually was able to transition to the Kelly shelter. So that's a success story that happened just by people having the opportunity to put their belongings in safe storage. There's lockers out there for them, but they also have room to keep their belongings. And then one exciting development that's been happening is that there's a company called Pallet Houses. You may have seen this, it's been in the news a little bit lately, but pallet houses are $6,800 a piece. They're very strong, they're very protective in the weather, and right now they don't have electricity out there, but if they did, they would have a heating element that they could use and lighting. So they had 7 initially donated, another donation came in and they were able to get 3 more, so that now they're up to 10. So this is a pretty exciting development for the urban campground. So just as far as just kind of a progress report for the livability team, and for the urban campground, we make all the referrals to the urban campground. We left it that way because we want to kind of do a quasi screen of folks. In other words, we don't want sex offenders going into a communal living situation. So we do a screen. It's still very low barrier, extremely low barrier, but we've made 226 referrals. 167 individuals have cycled through the campground. They've either gone on to the Kelly shelter or they've gone into veterans housing. That's the 24 other housing. Oftentimes it's veterans housing. You can see 46 have just elected to leave. Sometimes they just elect to leave. They get their monthly checks, disability checks, what have you, and they decide they want to go to a motel or go do something different. But our calls also for the Kelly shelter remain very low. I would say the Kelly shelter is definitely a success. They do a really great job in managing that campground. And since the inception of the livability team, they've been able to help assist 212 individuals get into housing, 7 individuals into kind of a high-level addiction service. I'm talking like beds available. 5 into mental health. 12 is just the medical accessories, things like that. And then 15 relocation are the bus tickets. Again, one of the criticisms that I hear, and we have folks coming to my city council, is that we really should have social workers doing this work, and that the uniform scares people, and what we do is unlike the traditional law enforcement role at all, and our folks really have built rapport with people. We don't get that sense of hostility that's often purported either by the advocates. It's more of the social media warriors, because I think most of the advocates even are on our side and really appreciate what we do. So, you know, our greenway poses some really unique challenges in that there's a lot of heavy vegetation, and it's just not a safe place for people to do outreach. So we will continue to do that, and continue to forge our partnerships and help our local vulnerable populations. So with that, that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions, or we can move to Rick.
Chief, before you go, could you talk a little bit about the ways in which the fires this past summer have reshaped the Greenway and what that's done to the population as they've kind of resettled in different areas?
I think what's happened is that some of the outlying county areas got burned pretty heavily. Our north end, right around Table Rock Road, got burned heavily. So I think it just kind of refocused people to more of the downtown area. So I think that's been the biggest thing. We, you know, we had the camp, kind of the ad hoc camp, spring up in Hawthorne Park, and which we had to clear out because it was causing lots of damage to the park. And we found that very few of those individuals were actually affected by the fire. So they were just kind of taking advantage of an opportunity to camp in the park.
Any other questions for Chief Clausen before you turn it over?
I just had a couple questions. I just taken some notes. On your first slide, you talked about one of the goals being enforce the law for business and public. What exactly is the law? What is the, I'm assuming we have some sort of camping ordinance, or just curious what the law is. And then a piggyback question, and I guess I'd include Chief O'Mara and Sheriff Sickler in it. What percentage of your time, resources, officers go to just daily dealing with the homeless?
Well, the law, there's a couple different laws that we use. So prohibitive camping, there's a prohibited camping law, which we can use for the Greenway specifically. That we have to be careful because of Martin versus Boise and the Grants Pass decision. As long as we post in advance, we can cite people for prohibited camping. We also have trespass situations quite frequently, and I use the parking garage. I said that earlier, and that's a frequent issue for us. We have the 2 parking garages in downtown Medford. Folks like the stairwells for some reason. The problem with that is that they defecate in there and urinate and shoot up drugs. And so for those folks, we will issue citations for trespass. The issue that we've run into, though, is that we're really trying to keep this population out of the jail. So because of COVID. So that's really affected us pretty greatly along the Greenway. That's why a lot of folks have just been allowed to stay down there. And then to your last question, I can certainly let others weigh in on it, but I think a fairly large, your question is challenging, and it makes me want to actually research this a little bit more. But you know, we respond daily. There's not a day that doesn't go by that we probably have 5 or 6 calls of disorderly individuals at, you know, like say around Walmart or downtown. So I bet 20 to 30% of our calls are dealing with individuals that are having some kind of mental health crisis, or they're homeless, or they're dealing with some kind of substance abuse issue.
Chief Omaris heard me. He was kind enough to give me his ear. We battle it severe here in Ashland. We certainly battle it. It's a very large business challenge that we deal with every day across the county. But we talk amongst ourselves that, you know, we see certainly our local police force. It seems, and of course we don't follow them around, but it seems just from the naked eye or from a citizen's eye that they spend a majority of their day dealing with the homeless population in Ashland. The resources that must go to it across our county seem just again from a citizen's view just seem daunting to me.
Yeah, I don't think from the sheriff's office we probably don't deal with the same level as the cities, just because our area tends to cover a lot of rural territory. So the concentration of homelessness isn't the same. But you know, there are other issues that can be related to, say, you know, homelessness, addiction, and mental health, and those would be really hard to capture, I think, Travis, because, you know, for instance, you know, I talked to a lady on the Greenway when I was down there. I went down there for a day to just see how things were going with my crew, and talked to this gal who was very forthcoming about her addiction and her criminality and some of the things, and she was doing better. But she didn't have housing. But, you know, she said when she was, you know, in the throes of her addiction and, you know, really kind of bucking the system, you know, she was committing like 10 to 15 crimes a day. And so police might respond to those and not necessarily equate that to a problem of homelessness or addiction because of a broken in car or a home or shoplifting or whatever, or somebody. And so, you know, you could say those are probably loosely tied to that, and we don't have a measurement, but a significant portion of resources are going to go to homelessness, addiction, and, you know, some mental health, but more so, I think, to the addiction issue. And that's what's kind of scary about 110 for us is, you know, working graveyard. I remember probably 85% of my calls involved addiction of some sort or intoxication, addiction or intoxication. So either drunk, domestics, family abuse, or drug addiction, and those types of things. So, you know, we probably can anticipate, you know, more significant issues as we move into February, March. But we do have almost a full-time person working in the Greenway trying to deal. And our issue changed pretty dramatically with the fires. A lot of the Greenway and the county areas was burned through. So I think that might put a little more pressure on Chief Clausen and his team, because I think they're more concentrated in the city of Medford now.
This is Jennifer. I have a comment, not so much a question, but just want to, first of all, really commend you on the work that's been done. It's pretty remarkable seeing the trust, both of people living on the Greenway and of the partnerships that have been built. So it's phenomenal. I saw on the urban campground the flag that this was initiated under COVID funds. And I think it might be a good discussion to have here at some point in the next couple months, next quarter or so, around wrapping our heads around the different services that we have started locally, either as a result of COVID funds or fire relief, disaster funds. Because we know that once those funds expire, the problems are going to continue to exist. And I want to make sure that we're thinking long-term and not setting up financial cliffs for these service providers or new programs and services that have been initiated.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and that's one that we're very concerned about, because we really only have funding through the 31st of December at this point, unless there's some new stuff, which I think there probably will be. But right now we only have, this is basically running $30,000 a month to run the urban campground. So it's while it's a good model, it's still a fairly expensive model, and it's one that Rogue Retreat just doesn't get enough donations to be able to support something like that. So, but I'm a huge believer. I'm gonna turn it over to Rick in just a second here, because he's gonna talk about the crisis approach. And I'm still a big believer in the urban campground and rogue retreats case management model. I really think, you know, I say it pretty much in every meeting that we talk about this, that you really have to put a roof over someone's head before you can really start dealing with mental health and addiction. And that's why I love what they're doing. I love their model. And I love how they're really trying to keep people focused on getting to the next level and getting to the next spot. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rick, and he can talk about some of the work that he's doing as well.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. Eric had asked me to talk some about the proposal that we're looking at for mobile crisis. But before I jump into that, he asked that I just give an update on how COVID and then the fires have really impacted our service delivery for Jackson County Mental Health. So before I jump into my PowerPoint with our proposal and what we're having community discussions regarding mobile crisis, let me just walk you through the last, what has it been, 6 months, 6 years? I can't really keep track of what really it's been lately, but when COVID first hit, we really adjusted to do our outpatient services pretty much entirely remote. But our crisis services, we still have some level of in-person and outreach throughout this whole entire time. We do have more staff working remote, especially as the governor's request. We try to have as many as we can working remotely, but we do still have a level of in-person, in-building crisis support. We did close down our living room. So for those that weren't familiar with that service, we have here in the crisis building, we have an area that is supported by peer support specialists that people can come and meet with a peer support specialist. We have a shower, we have a sleeping room, we have meals we can make for them. But just due to COVID concerns, we haven't been using that for the last several months. Instead, we've been utilizing our peers a little bit different, and I'll talk in a sec about that. But we really started to do more of a response with the Emergency Operations Center and some of what they were doing on the Greenway. And so we were going out pretty much every day with those that were delivering food to those that were on the Greenway as kind of a shelter-in-place component. So we were offering mental health supports as well as supporting the food delivery. That kind of grew into us continuing to work with law enforcement and with Rogue Retreat on urban campground support, as well as other supports for local shelters. And then we continue to do outreach with law enforcement. That kind of grew out of that partnership with the LIVABILITY team and some of the more creative things we were doing as a way to respond to COVID. So we still have staff every week that are going out with MPD, with their LIVABILITY team and doing outreach on the Greenway as well as other areas in Medford. And about, 2-3 months ago, we also added Ashland Police Department to that list. And so we have staff going out every week with Ashland Police to do some planned outreach efforts with those that law enforcement are identifying as kind of the highest need individuals that we need to do some contacts with. So we've been doing that, and that will continue to grow. And as I talk in a moment about mobile crisis, kind of how that may blend in. But the other thing related to the COVID that really has taken over some of the efforts that our crisis team has been doing, we've been working closely with public health. As public health identified the need for a place for people to go and to either isolate if they had tested positive from COVID and didn't have a place at home that they could isolate away from others, or to quarantine if they needed a place to be away from others for the 14-day quarantine period. So they contract with a local motel that they place people in, as well as they're placed through Department of Corrections, working with community justice when somebody's discharged from a facility, a prison, where they have had some level of outbreak of COVID and they need to quarantine upon return back to the community. So we work with those who are identified either from public health or from the Department of Corrections who are being admitted into this motel. It's the Supported Self-Care Recovery Site in FEMA term. So every day, 7 days a week, we have staff that are doing daily check-ins with them. We've partnered with probation officers who are coming out and doing check-ins in the mornings with those that are DOC, Department of Correction placed individuals. We have a contract with a local restaurant that provides food for them. So every day we're going to the restaurant, coordinating with them, and we bring a lunch, a dinner, and a breakfast for the next day to all those that are placed. Sometimes it's a couple, 20, 25 meals, or, I guess that's 60 to 75 meals a day, but, 20 to 25 people that we're supporting at any given time. We do additional shopping for them, really with the hope that they will stay there, because we don't want them to, especially those that are DOC admits or just getting out of prison and they have, they don't have any clothes and they don't have other items. And so we don't want them to say, screw this, I'm going to go to the store and get it myself. So we try to support them. So every day we're doing typically some additional shopping to help support those that are in the SSRS, the motel supported. And that has just kind of continued to grow and expand over time. So we've worked with Eric Geyer and with Community Justice. So now we have some additional Community Justice staff that are assisting. And then so that's ongoing. The next thing that happened was really the fire. So, when the fire impacted community and the expo became the evacuation center, Steve Lambert contacted me and said, hey, we need some help out here. So we rallied our crisis team, and really for probably more than 2 weeks, we had 24/7 mental health supports out of the expo. So my crisis team, a lot of them deployed out there, and my overnight staff were out there for 2 weeks. We also worked with a lot of our community partners because we needed more supports because the Red Cross was not there in an official capacity. The expo was being run by, the public health manager, the parks and rec manager, the mental health manager. It's like the county staff who just got that up and running, and Red Cross wasn't there initially. So we worked with our community partners and had about 10 to 15 volunteers a day, mental health therapists, case managers that came out to the expo and helped support those that were at the expo. Probably one of the biggest things we were able to do, one of my staff, Autumn Dozier, has previously worked in the medical field, and she had a good insight to how to help transition our high acuity medical building that had been stood up. That was really the barrier to being able to hand things over to the Red Cross. The Red Cross was not going to take over the sheltering of the expo until that facility had been closed up, because it was, the other thing public health had done is they had 24/7 doctor and nursing staff in that facility. So it was amazing to see what happened literally overnight and how much resource, but Red Cross wasn't going to take that on. And so until we had that medical building cleared, we were still on the hook to continue. And so when Autumn came out and some other supports from the community, we were able to rally, we were able to get that medical building cleared out within about 2 days, as opposed to the timeline, which was going to be 7 to 10 days to get that cleared out. So once that happened, we were able to transition the sheltering components over to the Red Cross. So the Red Cross then took that on. What happened because of COVID is when Red Cross took that on, it was no longer their typical way of doing congregate sheltering. The idea of, you're using a high school gym for a couple months to have everybody there until they can find other housing. Well, one, there wasn't other housing readily available that people are going to move into because so much housing had been burned, and we already have a housing shortage. But also because of COVID, they really didn't want people to stay in congregate sheltering. So that's where Red Cross has really transitioned people to motels. So people have now been transitioned to, initially there were about 20 motels that Red Cross was contracting with throughout the community. And so the expo was able to close fairly rapidly, even though the Red Cross supports are still ongoing today, because they are in non-congregate sheltering in motels throughout the community. And we kept thinking, you know, as a crisis team, we're going to be able to back out of this and turn that over to Red Cross, but we realized there's still a gap of services that we need to assist with as a community. Just like we kind of filled that gap with the expo before Red Cross took it on initially. So we've done some additional things really in coordination with our Emergency Operations Center. We have set up an emergency shelter task force that has different community partners that are helping to identify resources for those that are either weren't pre-fire impacted and are being discharged from motels, or people that were impacted by the fire but didn't get information to Red Cross and they were being discharged from motels. So we set up a Rogue Valley Connections email and phone number for people to contact if the Red Cross was having them discharged. And so we've been staffing that with either crisis staff or additional community partners. And we've been able to identify those that would have slipped through the cracks with Red Cross that really did need to stay in a motel. They were pre-fire impacted, and being able to get them connected back in and back into a Red Cross motel, or just connecting in with community partners, people that have high acuity, high level of complex needs. The Emergency Shelter Task Force is really helping support the Red Cross because honestly, it kind of overwhelmed their resources, and they do not have, certainly they don't have the local knowledge about what resources are available. So my staff, Autumn Dozier, has continued to be our main point of contact, and that's really become a full-time plus job for her. We're now at the point where we're starting to transition to the next phase. So trying to help identify what the transition from shelter would be for individuals. So we're in the midst of, it's called the MAST, M-A-S-T-T, the Multi-Agency Shelter Transition Team. So we're once again working with the community to get community partners to assist as we do individual interviews with each person, starting initially with those that are Red Cross placed, to identify what their transition plan would be and what resources are available, and then to connect in with there's the Emergency Shelter Task Force, but there's also the Transitional Shelter Task Force, and identify, like the trailers, FEMA trailers tended to be the idea that everything was going to go to that direction, and that's not going to be the answer for everybody because of the thousands of people that were displaced. But we're working now as kind of a core element of that MAST and that Emergency Shelter Task Force. So I'll pause there for a moment. That's kind of, what I do on my free time when I'm not doing crisis. That's what we've been doing the last couple of months. So I'll maybe pause there before I jump into my PowerPoint. Any questions on either COVID or fire response and what we as Jackson County Mental Health have been doing? Yeah, Gilda?
I'm wondering about that group, MAST, I think is the last name that you gave, that's overseeing the coordination of services, or the previous iterations of it. If they have, connections to people that can provide very culturally responsive services.
Yes.
Spanish translation, LGBTQ services, or, you know, how attuned is it to all those diverse needs?
That's been a big part of the conversation. We do have community partners that are in the Emergency Shelter Task Force, you know, like UNITE and other community partners that are there. That is part of what we, right now, with the ask of who's going to assist, to identify those that are, you know, bilingual, bicultural, that can assist. We know that there is a huge portion of the community that has not come forward to get support because of their concerns about, you know, documentation status, and so they're not coming forward. So it's still a work in progress. We know that this is not going to be over anytime soon, because there's this whole shadow community that's been impacted that have not, you know, they're not in the motels. They haven't come forward. I'd say the MAST is initially, it's a Red Cross partnership, and the state is assisting. So that's where we're starting, is with those that are currently placed in Red Cross sponsored motels. But we also know that there are others that probably have not come forward. So we're working with community partners to identify them and get the services out to them. That's by a doctor. And the doctor will need to determine whether or not they can place them on a hold, a physician's hold. They can remain on that hold to up to 5 judicial days. So weekends and holidays don't count, but basically 5 days. If at the end of the 5 days, if they are not ready to be discharged, then we need to take them to a commitment hearing in order to try to commit them through a court process. So this is a full-on court process. The judge is there, defense attorney's there, district attorney is there, witnesses are called, and the judge ultimately will make the determination whether or not they are committed. And even once they're committed, that doesn't mean they automatically get to the state hospital. Matter of fact, right now with the COVID restrictions, with the increase in aid and assist, the state hospital has really closed most of their civil commitment admits most of 2020. So even if somebody's gets to the point of being committed, then what, right? There's not other facilities that they're likely going to go to. And right now our data shows that about 5% of all those that are put on holds progress to a commitment hearing. So even if we can't get them to the hospital, you know, it's a small percentage that end up actually going to a hearing. So just sometimes people don't recognize the idea of this involuntary services and what level that it actually entails in order to get people to that point where we can put them in a state hospital or some other program. Our focus really is on how do we help people engage voluntarily, and what services can we offer them. All right, so one of the good news that I do have is that as part of this process, we were able to identify some additional funds from the county in order to hire a manager, program manager at crisis, to assist with the COVID response, to assist with the mobile crisis. And so I just hired Taji Allen, who joined us on this Zoom. So Taji Allen is our newest program manager here at Jackson County Mental Health. So she will be the one who will assist me as we work on developing, you know, ongoing COVID supports and then mobile crisis supports. Those that haven't worked with Taji before, she was a previous crisis therapist here for years. She was embedded in Ashland with Chief O'Mara's crew. She was a former PCI, pre-commitment investigator. She was the administrator at the Beckett Center. I mean, I can just go down her resume. She's like a perfect fit for this position. So she just started this week, so I'm excited to announce that we now have Taji to make all this happen. That's her job. So. All right, I'm going to take a breath and see if there's any questions or any further discussion on any of that.
Rick?
Yeah, Beth.
This is Beth. So when the living room is up and running, how will that maybe kind of work hand in hand with the crisis stuff that you're talking about? Was that living room available off hours or just 8 to 5?
It has been just 8 to 5. Part of it is that our facility really isn't set up for that to be an really a stabilization center. You know, the living room is open to all of our offices, and so it's not it's really not set up for that. We have done some of that in the pre-COVID world. MPD would probably every week would bring somebody to the living room, and so we have used it as kind of maybe a pilot project with that. But certainly, I think the need is much greater, and it needs to be a facility that has much more space and could accommodate. And just the layout of our building is not set up to be conducive to that. And not with our staffing pattern of having one staff here after hours. So that's why it never really became its own stabilization center. But during the daytime, it was heavily used. I mean, we were every day pretty much people were taking showers or sleeping here for a couple hours, getting food. But it's just unfortunately not usable now with COVID restrictions, and really not a supplement for or take the place of the stabilization center. Yeah, Gilda?
First of all, welcome, Taji, and thank you for taking that position. Wishing you the best. I have a couple questions, Rick. One was the first pillar that I think you were talking about, like hotline and crisis response. Is that available in Spanish as well?
Not so much. So we have had in the past, depending on staffing, we have had staff that did speak Spanish that worked overnight. But on a consistent basis, I don't have somebody that is bilingual, bicultural. We do have a language line that when somebody calls and does need it, then we will do kind of a three-way conversation with a contracted language line. So in a sense, yes, it is, but honestly, it's clunky when we have somebody that we need and then contact a language line to do a three-way conversation, but we can do that.
Yeah.
But in the past, I have had bilingual and bicultural staff that have worked overnights, but we just don't have that currently.
All right. And I had one more question. Sorry, a real quick one. Sorry, I had an interruption with my phone. So both that having Spanish bilingual bicultural staff would be a great project, and also what you said about the mobile response, increasing the number of staff. It feels like both of those are really kind of urgent needs given the population that we have. And I'm just thinking like it needs to be on the table, right, for looking for funding and all that. It would. Right.
Yeah, and those are conversations that, I've had conversations with the sheriff, with Ty, with Chief Clausen, with Jackson Care Connect, Jennifer, I talked with Julia Jackson, had conversations with Mercy Flights, so we're working on looking at what that proposal would be. But you're right, it's like we need it yesterday. But something that is complex like this, we also need to make sure that we do it right. So we're working on that proposal like literally as we speak. So
great. Good luck. And I wonder if there's even like federal funding or anything like that could be available, on.
Yeah, we went for, earlier this spring, we went for a state grant, the Impacts grant. Unfortunately, we weren't one of the counties that were selected for that grant. Some of these funds that we were hoping to get would have been towards this program. But when we didn't get that grant, our commitment was still that we need to have this service in our community. And so we're figuring out how to not let that die with the lack of a grant. And so we're still moving forward to figure out what we do as a community.